Thank you so much, Teelo, for joining us and sharing your experience with the production company that you started, Frame Perfect, the collective. And you're also going to be talking about how you're supporting positive change in the freelancing world. So before we get into it, could you tell me, like, why is diversity important for you in the freelancing business?
I think diversity in all capacity is important for a creative industry in particular, because no concept or collaborations that we all have grown to love and see came from just one group of people, even though it can look like that a lot of the times. But like age diversity plays a part, wisdom, experiences, how we view the world, ethnicity, your race, your gender, with your beliefs, your culture, your even down to religious beliefs, because all these things I feel like play a part into the creative juices and the genius that gets established. Like we wouldn't have what I can't even think of any, but some of the campaigns that we all know or have significance of knowing, those I feel like, from my understanding and part of my professional assumption, is that has to have come from diversity. Now, in regards to why it's important and why I feel like it should be embedded in no matter what we do, is because we all come from different walks of life. And being a creative, being an artist, is your form of expression in how you view the world or how you view a subject or concept. So to me, that's why diversity is important. If we want to, like, we live in there's like 7 point something billion of us. So without diversity, how do we appeal to the world? How do we appeal to us as a human race before religions, beliefs, race, gender, equality, etc.? Not equality, sorry, gender, etc. Stuff like that. So yeah, that's why I feel diversity is very important.
Um, Absolutely, yeah, thank you. And you've been in the freelancing business for 8 years, if I'm not mistaken.
So 8 years, yeah.
Amazing. So what have you seen throughout this path of yours? Have you seen some changes, or some things maybe worsening? What's your experience been like?
To be honest, I've definitely noticed change, or not just change, but I've also noticed a bit more transparency to our industry, and what goes on. Because like when I first started, I was going through a transition in my life, coming from where I was to where I was going. And if we want to talk about diversity and some of the obstacles, I feel like the first obstacle that I came across was doubting myself, was judging myself to the stereotype that being a young African Caribbean individual may go against, because this is what we see in the media. And it's not always something that, let's be honest, like I never grew up in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, so I haven't really experienced like in your face racism or challenges in that sense. But one thing I have noticed is, like I said, the challenge in doubting and stereotyping myself, almost was like me believing that, oh, I never got this job because of my nationality. And I'm saying it's 50-50. There could be times where I've experienced myself that I didn't get something because of that, or someone else may have experienced something a bit more harsher, in a sense that they never got X, Y, or Z because of their nationality. And so that's why I say it's 50-50, in a sense that there was self-doubt. I may have experienced not getting certain contracts, or certain contracts because of that, but it wasn't in my face to say, oh, because you're African Caribbean, we're not giving you this. So it's almost hard to tell. And after a while, what happened for me is that it was when I got my first, I was basically given an appraisal at Urban Outfitters, and I was doing the most. I was sending emails, I was showing them all our new photo shoots we would do, and all these kind of things. I kind of had the thing like, well, no one knows who I am behind email, so if I keep showing off all the good work we do, we should get recognized. And we got a call back. And what kind of knocks back my confidence, in a sense, and I do give thanks that I was strong or had tough skin in this sense, is that when I did turn up to the meeting, there was like, oh, are you Teelo? Because yeah, and that was like, whoa, why would I be here at 10:30 a.m. if I wasn't? And in the back of my head, it did upset me. It did knock me back. It did kind of, yeah, knock my confidence in a sense, because it's like, why, how, what does it matter? And but one thing I kept saying to myself, and this is something I do preach to even to the mentees that I mentor, and I always say to them, sometimes don't take this literally, everybody. But I lied to myself and I was like, no, I got this. I can prove my worth. I know what I'm bringing to the table. And why I say lie to myself, because I was going through a self-doubt moment at that time when I was like, are you Teelo? And I was like, shh, I was going to swear there. Can I do this? Am I capable of doing this? And now I'm here. It's like, oh my gosh, my palms are sweating, everything. So I had to kind of keep telling myself, no, I got this. I'm bringing something to the table. I know what I can do, X, Y, and Z. And after repeating that to myself a few times and then going in to do my pitch, it kind of left my forefront of my conscious thoughts. And yes, it was niggling in the way in the back, but that moment for me, because I got through it, we got the contract as well, and everything like that. They didn't give us the full brief of what we was asking for or what we wanted to deliver for them, but the fact that we got a portion of it and they gave us the opportunity was reassuring for me that, do you know what? I need to not self-doubt myself. I need to not let the stereotype that society has portrayed to us because of my ethnicity get in the way. And in a sense, until someone kind of like blatantly in my face says we are not doing this because of that, then I try not let that self-doubt get in the way. Because like I said, some of the greatest collaborations, some of the greatest campaigns came from people of diversity, however you want to see it. Like one of my favorite photographers is Mario Testino. And like coming from where he comes from, the climate, the culture, the way they live, the habitats, everything, he brought a different flavor to the way imagery was taken, regardless of him or people classing him as a Caucasian or anything like that. But just bearing in mind, he came from South America. So it's a whole different kind of mindset, culture, beliefs, everything. So that's why I'm saying diversity does matter. So this is where I had to say to myself, okay, I was self-doubting myself with the not believing because of how they responded to me, which could have been a stereotype coming from their point of view. Yes, I'm not disregarding that. But then also saying to myself that I can do this. There's a reason why I'm here. There's a reason I'm chasing this. And there's a reason why I got the call back to have this meeting. And it was after delivering that I kind of had a bit more self-belief in myself. So anything obstacle-wise in regards to race, religion, or gender, I tried not to let that be at the forefront of my consciousness. Just so that I don't let that stop my greatness, regardless of how the other person may be viewing me or stereotyping me. So that was like one of my first real industry moments where I felt like I was immediately stereotyped. Now I'm not your traditional, and I don't feel like there is a traditional creative. Like we're not in an office industry where we wear suits and ties and blazers and stuff like this. We are creatives. Like I've met amazing creatives that came from their work studio, got paint all over them and stuff like that. And to the normal person, they may judge them or stereotype them, but being in that creative space, when you converse with someone and you find out all the amazing things they do, you have to look past the stereotype or the ethnicity of who the person is you're speaking to, because of the amazing things they can do or have done. So this is why I say it's a 50-50 thing. Yes, we do face these obstacles. Well, 8 years ago, I was facing some of these obstacles. To also self-doubt in myself. Now, the journey over the years, before the Me Too movement, before Black Lives Matter raising the awareness on diversity, etc., we've always had this challenge. And I feel like where we may, this is just my out view on it. Where we may have gone wrong is look into these corporate establishments that have been here for 30 to 50 to 60 years. That's had a long time, and they are in their way. They're stuck in, obviously they've gone with times, but their mentality has been from the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. So those current times of them being in that space at that time, yes, racism, stereotypism, even genderism and stuff like this was heavily oppressed, and it was all about the corporates, this trickle down effect that they all talk about. And yes, we all know that, as everyone says, this at the top is always like Caucasian owned or dominated. Even if you want to talk about like the women diversity included into that top tier and stuff like this, and I get that. But one thing that I've kind of, now that I can look back at it since the lockdown, one thing that I've seen and look across my journey is, if amongst us creatives and artists stick together and look past those things and network, collaborate, maintain communication, have conversations, I feel like amongst ourselves we can create that local circular economy in a sense of this. If the Urban Outfitters, I got the contract from Urban Outfitters, I now need to curate my team within my collective, or if I have to outsource, now I'm in a position of being able to say, I can do this fairly. So I can have like a percentage of all different ethnicities as long as they can do the job. Because another thing is, it's not even so much I'm going to pick that person because they're African Caribbean, I'm going to pick this person because they're English. It comes down to giving everyone the opportunity, but more importantly, can they do the job? Can they fulfill the task at hand? And I feel like it's the results and the person's capabilities that's more important, or should be judged first. Yeah, should be judged first before their race, ethnicity, or belief. Really, we shouldn't even be judged on those things anyway, but it should be our capabilities that are looked at first. So the journey has, I've seen a change since, I guess, since the birth of social media as well, because I kind of came at a time where social media was first just kind of starting, and seeing the voices, and this is why the freedom of speech thing is so touchy at the moment, because with social media, it allowed us to amplify our voices. It allowed us to be heard in a type of way. So having the Me Too movement, having the Black Lives Matter movement, having, I can't remember, sorry, I've had such a long day. I can't remember any other movements that's taken place, but those two in significance, which brought in women diversity, which brought in ethnicity diversity, I feel like that has created a sense of awareness. But what has also been a bit of a catch-22 is now, if amongst ourselves we can create this circular economy by looking past our ethnicity, race, and belief, ethnicity and belief, and about what we're capable of doing, and if one of us in that community gains a contract from a corporate that we are able to put on others from a diverse background, what I've also seen that corporates, and I don't want to keep like I'm shaming the corporates, because I also understand there's in the business, there's got to be profit, there's got to be a business model, etc. But I feel like the corporates also take advantage of these Me Too movements, or the Black Lives Matter moments, or BAME, introducing a BAME inclusive community.
Sorry, Teelo, let me just jump in so we avoid any generalizations, because as you mentioned, like, it's not all just good and bad. But thank you so much for mentioning it. You've been talking about the overcoming obstacles, how you kept repeating to yourself that you are worth it, that you've got this, you can do it, and it really helped you get through a challenging situations. This is really useful to know what people can do to move from self-doubt to self-worth. So thank you so much for sharing that. And you also mentioned that some of the greatest campaigns that you worked on came from diversity and people in diversity, which is super inspiring. So really good to hear those points. Before we move on to the circular economy, we have a question from Creative, who's asking, I have worked in the creative arena for over 20 years. Have you spoken to other creatives about their experience before the internet?
Before the internet, no, to be honest, no, because it wasn't something that I was aware of myself in that capacity. It was only, I guess, through my journey of having some of these experiences, networking with other creatives and hearing their experiences, that it started to paint this picture. Because one thing that I don't want to do is just judge things on my perspective of what I've just gone through, because there's so many of us that have different experiences. So before the internet, no, I've never really had that conversation.
Okay, thank you for mentioning. Maybe Creative, you can mention what is your experience or what is it that you'd like to know about the period before that. And if we were to move on a little bit, so you were talking about circular economy, and feel free to come back to it. My question would be,
Yeah.
what we as freelancers, and the Freelancer Club collects over 50,000 freelancers now, so we very much believe in the power of community and collaboration. What can each individual do to help facilitate or maybe support this positive movement to introduce more diversity and inclusion in the freelancing business?
My one suggestion would be, because this is something I'm practicing myself, is I think some of us now need to start working into those positions that are gatekeeper positions, as in if you're a creative director, a producer, um, any of those kinds of titles that have, or your role is to curate the team members, is to hire that photographer or photographers for this job. I feel like what some of us need to start doing, or more of us needs to start working towards those types of positions. Because then if someone like myself, for example, is lead creative director in a brand or for an advertising company, if I'm working with the head of production who then curates the team, I then have a say over, or I have some influence over the types of people that get hired for this production or that brief. So I feel like, yeah, we need to put ourselves in some of these positions. And if these bigger brands or corporates don't take us on, then we create those positions ourselves. Because I've met a lot of amazing creative directors, casting directors, head of production members who feel or see things the same way as the majority of us do. And I feel like if more of us get into those positions, the more we can then make change from the top down.
Right, thank you. And would you maybe have some recommendations for, let's say, freelance photographers, freelance models? There's a lot of those on the platform. And I know that you talk about kind of the group, the team effort, if you'd like, but each one of them as individuals have a very important part to play, but also a very challenging one. So what do you think is like something that kind of gives us faith? Let's say there's a freelance photographer applying for a job and they faced with a similar case or similar situation to what happened to you. Maybe they're not strong enough to keep repeating, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. So what can we do otherwise to support the positive change, you think?
So that I definitely understand, because again, not everyone, we're not all the same, so we all deal with things differently. But one thing that I would suggest that I know that's helped me is, since we're talking about diversity, why don't we diverse our approach? Why don't we, and when I say diverse our approach, I remember there was one time that I can't say any names, companies' names, but I listed a number of different companies where I found out where their head offices were. So instead of me sending an email, I actually printed my portfolio and my credentials there, and I went round handing them in. And my thought behind that was, let the work speak for itself. Now, to someone who may, and this is another thing, I think as a freelancer, as a creative, is learning how to package yourself and your creative genius or your creative eye. And why I say that is because nowadays, because technology is advanced, we are kind of saturated. So if there's like hundreds of photographers, how do I stand out from the hundreds of photographers? And then this is where I would say to people is identifying how you can package your creative eye, how you take your images or style those garments or model. As a model, what is the persona that you represent? So if I'm going to be a model, I'm too short, but if I was going to be a model, I would probably see myself as someone who wants to stand up for the future of empowerment. So my branding, or how I position myself as a model, would be to have an ethos that is supporting social change, supporting different social activities, to the point that the brands I then, if I'm a freelancer model, the brands I then target have similar goals or similar integrity that they're working towards. So that when a brand, so the thing is this, when a brand looks for a model, it's not just, does the model look good, do they fit the clothes, it's what does this model's image portray, how does it engage or communicate to the target audience. So if we make clothes for people who are sustainable conscious, and they are very driven towards making social change in regards to how we look after our planet, how do I represent that as a model? And that could be done, and then in terms of the capacity, that could be in any way. You could be doing blogs, vlogs, you could be putting out posts, you could, the pictures you put on your Instagram could represent that. I'm not saying every picture has to be that, but in terms of what you're packaging or how you package yourself, that would be a suggestion that I would make, even as a photographer. So if you're a photographer and you're sending out your portfolio, identify what the brand is, what is their mission statement, how do they take their images, what's the aesthetics like, how do I then match, or does my work match their brand aesthetics or what they want to portray, in a sense of, as well, once you kind of identify that, you should then be able to say to yourself, how do I identify myself as a photographer? So if I'm going to be, let's touch on the environmental sustainable subject. If I want to be that, what is going to make me stand out or make me differentiate myself from other photographers? Could it be the way I take the images, the angles? Could it be the types of images I take? Could it be where I am in the environment? It's hard to say, but in a generic term, it would be to find your calling, find how to package yourself and display your creative uniqueness. Because what a brand looks for isn't, oh, you're a photographer, you know how to work a camera, so we're just going to pay you to come and do it. No, they're hiring a photographer, model, or fashion stylist for your creative uniqueness and how you creatively see or create the world or image.
100%. Thank you for mentioning it. And it's very important that you talk about like being selective with the type of work you do, because we often hear that from people who are starting. They're grateful for any kind of work or jobs, but actually it might not be the right choice to make at the start. So thank you for mentioning it. And we have Creative waving hands. So would you like to ask a question?
Yes, yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've got a question. How do you feel about the way things have gone over the last, say, couple of years, the last 2 years? I guess since the whole Black Lives Matter period up until now, from a creative perspective, how do you feel things have gone? Because there seems to be a lot of change that's happened.
It's a catch-22, because as I was mentioning before, even though the awareness of diversity and inclusion has been raised and we're starting to see some of the BAME community in certain positions or more on screen, I then also, to contradict that on the catch-22 side of things, is it being used as a trend because it's the latest topic, or is this something that a lot of the companies or brands are really trying to incorporate for the longevity of it? And coming from my point of view and experiences, at the moment, it's just weird times. It's so hard to tell who's being genuine and who's not being genuine in that respect, because then even with everything about the freedom of speech and everything, if you was to say something about, oh, there's not enough inclusion or there's not enough diversity, someone could then respond by, well, look at the commercials we've been making. And it's like, but is that just a one-off? Do they have a rolling contract? Is there a format to make sure that in all productions moving forward, behind and in front of the cameras, that there is that inclusion involved. And this is where I say, and I don't want this to come out in the wrong way, but this is where I say now, like even for myself, this is where I want to kind of put myself at the forefront with something to prove that forget the race or my ethnicity, look what I'm bringing to the table. But again, it's because this is our first year out of lockdown. This is still weird times, even for us to try and grasp in that sense. So to answer that question, it's still that catch-22. Are we being used, or is it being used because it's a latest trend? Yes, it is nice to see more of us on screen and behind the screen, but where's the longevity in that? Has that been implemented? And to be honest with you, Collective Creative, for me to give like a straight one answer, it's still hard to kind of answer that. Because I remember even working at a model agency, this was a good couple of years ago, and it was like, oh, we got enough, sorry, I don't like the term, we got enough African Caribbean models, and they only had 3 on their board. And I was like, how is that enough? So again, even though they had 3 BAME models on their board, how effective is that? Where's the longevity in that if you're only going to keep it to 3, even though that was some time ago? But now, again, is it being used as a trend? Is there longevity in what we're seeing behind and in front of the screen? I don't know.
Yeah. It's the reason I asked the question is, I mean, my initial question about whether you've sort of spoken to people with experience pre the internet is because I've worked in the design area for over 20 years now, and I've had different experiences. I've seen things how they were before, and I've seen things change over a period of time. And I know that there was a marked, almost like a turning point 2 years ago when the incident with George Floyd took place. And all of a sudden, it's like there was an outpouring of a lot of opportunities for Black people to be able to demonstrate what they can do. So previous to that, I'd worked in design companies where, I mean, I can give an example. I worked in a company where we had an image library, and the image library had various models, and my role as a designer was to make a selection of models from this image library. However, the image library only had a few images of people of color in that library. So every year, and this is over a 10-year period, I would make suggestions for the image library to be expanded to include more diversity. And the company wasn't forthcoming in taking on board my suggestions because from their perspective, they were saying that there wasn't really a demand for people of color. So from their perspective, I mean, I can understand what they were saying in that they were being real. You know, they were telling it like it was. There wasn't that demand. But now, obviously, a lot has changed. So there is more of a demand. But I think a lot of that is driven by, it's a bit like a famine for so many years, and then all of a sudden there's a feast. You know, there's so many, I mean, there's so many opportunities now for people of color to be used, I guess, for advertising and this sort of thing currently. But it's almost like a knee-jerk reaction. You know, I was around years before, so I saw what happened before and how things were, and then all of a sudden there's this change. And when I say people of color, I mean across the board, all races, all nationalities. So I understand that when it comes to, I mean, economics always wins often in certain battles, and if it pays a company to use people of color, then they will use them. But the gatekeepers are the ones who decide who's viable and who can be used in advertising. And even though when we look at, say, television advertising, there are certain models being cast, and it does make me wonder about who's making that selection. You know, because there are certain models who are being portrayed on television, and sometimes it feels as though they're guinea pigs. If there's a new product that they want to put out there, they will sometimes test it with a person of color. And then if there's take up on it, then they will, roll out. You see where I'm going with this? So
Yeah.
yeah, and I've seen this over a period of years. So this is why I say, if you've sort of connected with people pre the internet, because I saw how things were beforehand,
So
and I can
pre
see
the
how things are
internet,
now.
now that you've said the question like that, yes, I have. I've spoken to a lot of people who are elder than me from our dysphoria, our community, and they have given me some insights. Again, I'd love to say some names because I was talking a few months back with someone who worked in MTV. And they were doing a lot of things, and they was telling me about some of the challenges they were going through. But then another thing that they made me aware of is that the challenges they were also getting from their own community as well. And in regards to what you're saying, this is why I said it's a catch-22 at the moment, because is it a trend? Is there longevity in it? Even though you're using us, yes, economic wise, it may bring in more money for them, etc. And I think this is where we as individuals and as a society or community need to also understand we create that demand. It's us that we fuel and create the value of these brands to sell their clothes at X, Y, or Z price. It's, for example, if I always said this to a lot of brands, if they did use more BAME models, for example, how much more people would you appeal to, which then would increase your sales? Because, for example, someone like myself, if I go into a store and I see a poster or a picture with a guy wearing a nice shirt and he's like, say he's Caucasian, for example, it's hard for me to see myself in that shirt because I can't relate to it in that sense. Yes, it's a nice shirt. Yes, he might be a good looking lad, etc. But how do I see myself in that? So this is where it never made sense to me in why wouldn't they include, or why wouldn't there be an inclusion of diversity across the BAME communities? Because I'm sure if you had a diverse group of models, for example, it would appeal to more of a diverse custom base of who's coming to shop with you. So it's a tricky one because it brings in money. Do they genuinely care, or are they using it just because of the money? This is why I said this. Well, if we start working towards, I don't know how, I don't have all the answers, but if we could work towards those gatekeeper positions, I'm sure if someone like you was in that position, you would ensure there is that inclusion, there is that diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing, I mean, I work as a design consultant at the moment, and because of my training, I've trained in many areas. I've done photography, I've worked in graphic design. I'm also an illustrator as well.
Oh, wow.
And because I'm an illustrator, that means I know how to draw. And because I know how to draw, that means I've had years of drawing people, which means I've had to train myself to draw all different types of people. So there's an automatic diversity from a youngster. I'm observing and taking things in. So there isn't any sort of a blocker to understanding how people look and capturing their features. So that's the discipline that's within me. And what I've discovered is that's additional work to do to draw people of different races. It's additional work, if you like, which I'm happy to do, and I've been happy to do over the years. But then I've come across people who haven't had that discipline. They haven't had to sit and look at different hair types, different shapes of features and things. They haven't had that, and because they haven't gone through that discipline, then they don't have the same appreciation. They take things for granted. They don't, and this is my personal experience. So it's one of those situations where diversity is kind of baked into my training as a designer. So if I'm producing an image, then I can look at the different features that I want to represent, whether I'm drawing them or if I'm selecting a photograph or a magazine layout or something like this. And my canvas is really, my palette is broad, I can really, but I realize that not everyone thinks in the same way because they haven't had to over the years, because the way society has been set up is it favors a particular, let's just say a limited palette. But now what's happened is things are starting to branch out and be a lot more extensive to say, okay, we have these other shades as well. And then they're realizing that there's economic viability in that as well. It actually pays to, you know, for Google to have a camera which includes multiple shades of you know, to capture different shades of people, this sort of thing. So they're realizing that it's economically viable to sorry, you want to say something?
No, sorry, I hate to interrupt, but it's just that we've run out of time and I have to pause this conversation because
Right.
we could go on forever. But thank you so much for mentioning it, Emma Creative, that you've been inclusive of this experience, or you've been including this in your professional practice, which has been plus 20 years.
Absolutely.
So it's incredible to hear this experience, and thank you for sharing it. And I really, really loved what you, Teelo, said, that forget the ethnicity, look at what I'm bringing to the table. And I think this could be like the golden star that we could all aim towards, because as you mentioned, as you were both mentioning, it's a spectrum and we keep uncovering this spectrum, but if each one of us does their little bit, I believe, maybe naively, but I really believe that there's going to be the equality that we need, and that the things we're consuming and the content that we're consuming will truly reflect who we are. So I would love to end on this. Thank you so much for participating. And Teelo, thank you so much for sharing your experience. One last thing to wrap up.
One last
Please.
Sorry, it's Creative as well. And I totally get what you're saying about people having that discipline or being exposed to these different diversities. But this is where it takes us to start this now and share this amongst our community and keep sharing and collaborating and telling our story and working with others, because unfortunately, the only way we're going to see change is with the next generation of creatives or business owners like us. I don't mean age-wise, I mean us coming to the forefront. So it's just going to be, and unfortunately, with what you've just said, that is something that stems like socially, where people live, education-wise. It's such a big thing. But in terms of creative industry, I think if me, you, and others are like us stick together, collaborate, share our stories, show our worth, package and grasp our culture, everything like that, we would have a lot more leverage and ground to stand on. But yeah,
absolutely. Well said.
Thank you so much. And guys, if anyone wants to collaborate, the great place to do so is on the Freelancer Club, where you can set up different collaborations, and go check out Frame Perfect as well on all different social media platforms to see what Teelo and the collective are already doing for promoting more diversity in the creative industry. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. The recording, as always, will be available on the website, so you can watch it for free for the next.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Teelo. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you,
Yes.
man.
Yeah,
Thank you. Bye.